It's really lovely to be here at the Goethe Institute, and I just thought I might mention that if you're wondering what this is, it's not a little Australian animal, it's actually a microphone. What I'd love to do is just to share a few thoughts about this topic, and we will have some meditation practice. And there'll be plenty of time for some discussions, some questions. Some say that there's two prime emotions in life, love and fear, and that all other emotions stem from those two. I think all of us have the experience of how paralyzing fear can be. But we also know how life-transforming love can be. And sometimes people say that love is letting go fear. And some years ago, I was actually in Melbourne, and I have a friend there whose mother I'd known most of my life. And she would describe herself as quite a nervous, fearful, and anxious type of person, which I would say is quite common today. And unfortunately she contracted cancer, which made her more fearful, more worried, more nervous. And one day her son rang me and said that she was terminal, she wasn't going to survive, and would I go and visit her in hospital. So you know how sometimes in life scenes are recorded in your intellect like a movie, and I remember I went into the hospital and it was just sunset and her room was right at the end of a long passage, and when I got to her room it was completely dark inside and it felt so quiet. You know how sometimes you can feel the atmosphere in a room? So I tippy-toed in so quietly and I just sat down. And all I could see was her silhouette lying in the bed. And after a few minutes, she said, "Charlie, I love you." And quite honestly, that was so uncharacteristic of this lady. And in her final...
Just change the camera. Like this. Thank you.
I'm completely wired up now. And it was almost like that, once she realized she wasn't going to survive, she began to think, well, I may as well be the person I've always wanted to be. She let go all her fear, and she became the person she really wanted to be. She became incredibly loving. And it was like a huge lesson in life for me. You know how sometimes we feel fearful of expressing our love, or fearful of expressing our feelings, or fearful of being very open and vulnerable, and so we stop it sometimes. And yet it's so important, I think, to really, rather than dance to my fears, to really become the person I want to be and express myself. And I think in all my years of my spiritual journey, the thing I value most is the experience of love, and I'm sure most of you in the room would be similar. And my experience is that when the heart is full of love, I feel so easy about myself, so relaxed, so content, I would say, and I notice my attitude towards people is a lot more understanding and compassionate. But at the other end of the spectrum, when you experience fear, in a millisecond that you have a thought of fear, a feeling of fear, it's like adrenaline and cortisol just pump through your body. Your heart starts to go boom, 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 your stomach churns. And just as love is the seed of so much positive emotion, I would say fear is the seed of so much negative emotion. There's stress, there's anxiety, there's tension. And you know how the mind begins to imagine all sorts of scenarios The mind creates all this imagination. You can't concentrate, you can't relax, you can't sleep. And I think, as you may know, that there's so much research today about the relationship between emotions and health. And actually there's a lot of fascinating research between the fear and the heart. And if someone was to run in this this room now, if someone was to run into this room and say, there's a fire in the building, what's the first thing that would happen? Most of us, even before you run for the door, the heart goes boom, 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 boom. If every day I wake up and I have fear of a personality in my life, I have fear of an authority figure in my life, I have fear that a project may not work out, I have fear about an outcome of something, what is happening is that fear is putting pressure on my heart. My heart is just a little pump, and eventually that heart will give away. That heart will stop. And unfortunately, as we know, we live in a world of fear. We live in a world gripped by fear. I don't know how you feel when you watch the news at night. How do you feel when you watch all the situations? You know, it's such an unsafe world in which we live. The streets aren't safe, the homes aren't safe, absolutely nowhere is safe. It's such a violent world, and unfortunately sometimes so full of hatred. But that's like the big picture of life. But all of us specialize in our own unique types of fears. And I don't know whether you're aware, but one of the greatest fears of many people is doing what I'm doing at the moment, public speaking. A lot of people, because when you stand in front of people, you feel judged, and why we feel quite uncomfortable. I once read a survey on the internet which asked, would you prefer to speak in front of people or swim in a tank of sharks? Some people chose the sharks. Really, they did. But actually, I also have a friend who's a concert pianist, beautiful piano player. And he was telling me once that some of the best musicians in the world no one knows about. Because when they perform in public, they freeze. And you know, actually I met a musician today who was actually, he auditioned for an incredibly huge part in the National Opera here, and he said he got so nervous he didn't do very well in his audition. These things do happen, and even I would say one of the most common fears of most people is fear in relationships. And many of us have a fear that we will be rejected, that people won't like me, people won't accept me. It's such a common fear. There are just so many different, there's a whole kaleidoscope of fears which all of us face. But tonight, in a way, we're really looking at, I would say, spiritual approach to dealing with fear. And I want to really talk about 3 types of fears. And the first one are like physical fears, which I would say is like the fears of loss of wealth, loss of material things, possessions, the fears of loss of health, old age, illness, etc. And perhaps the ultimate physical fear is the fear of death. And at the heart of fear, I would say, is the fear of loss. And actually, it's not just the loss of my body. In a sense, it's the loss of my identity, it's the loss of my image, it's the loss of my reputation, it's the loss of my skills, it's the whole lot of things. And when you think the way we live life today, I find so naive, It's like from a little child, there's a few here today, we invest in an identity. and our entire life we invest in a whole sense of who I am. And yet everything is temporary. You know, that whole sense of identity that I invest in is temporary. And so we come to this point where we fear losing that thing. And the more I attach my heart to things, the more I fear losing them. And the only thing, what do they say? And I think really the first step in a future without fear, if I can use that language, is to understand that the only permanent thing in life is change. You know, everything is impermanent. And I really love the analogy that life is like a train journey. You know, when you sit in a train, what happens? You stop at a station. People hop on the train, people hop off the train. You go to the next station, people hop on, people hop off. The same thing keeps happening. Eventually you hop off the train. You know, life is the train. And what happens in life? People come into your life, people go out of your life. Roles, responsibilities, they come into your life, they go out of your life. Ultimately, you can't hold on to anything. And really the wisdom of life is that to enjoy life, love people, but as soon as I become dependent on roles, responsibilities, people, whatever, I build fear into my life. I build fear, the fear of loss into my life. And really what spirituality says, what is constant in amongst all this change? What is permanent amongst all of this change? It's the self. It's the permanent self which is constant in amongst all this change. These are fairly permanent these days too, aren't they? And in a way, I would say the first step in meditation is really beginning to understand the permanent self. The self that as everything changes around me is absolutely constant. And this is why the whole journey towards meditation, the first step is to answer the question, who am I? And when I begin to think of that big question of life, who am I feel there's like three personalities inside all of us. Two of them fill me with fear. Two of them grow fear into my life, and one of them starts to help me release fear from my life. And I would say the first personality is what I call the I of arrogance or the I of superiority. And this personality takes its whole sense of self from all the labels of my body. You know, who am I? I just see myself as a whole set of temporary labels. And when my ego, or this I of arrogance, this I of superiority, is ruling my inner world, it creates a whole thinking, feeling, behavioral structure. I compare with others and I think, I am better, I know more, I am right. But when my ego, this attachment to the temporary self, all the labels of my body, is ruling my feelings, that's when I feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, excluded, sensitive. Anyone here sensitive? I think we're all a bit sensitive, aren't we? So I often feel whenever those emotions are being felt, it's an indicator that the false self is deceiving me. The false self is ruling my inner world. And when my ego is ruling, there's a deep relationship with fear. In a sense, the more ego, the more fear in life. And the more I have ego, I have the fear that people will see through my facade And they will see that I'm not as really confident as I look. You know, I don't have the self-respect or love for myself as I may project to others. I have the fear of living up to others' expectations. So the more ego, the more fear is built into my life. So the first personality is the I of arrogance or the I of superiority. But I often feel this is the facade covering the second personality or the second I. And this is the I of inferiority, if I could say, the ego of inferiority, or the I of lack of self-respect. And when this I is ruling my inner world, it also takes my whole sense of identity from all the temporary labels of my body. And I compare with others, but it's the flip side. I start to think others are better, others know more, others don't love me, others don't value me, others don't respect me. And so when my sense of lack of self-respect is ruling internally, or my sense of inferiority, when it comes into my feelings, that's when I sometimes feel hopeless, inadequate, unworthy, and I would say depressed. And in psychology, depression is like a sadness that my dream in life to be loved and valued hasn't happened. But in spirituality, depression is like a mourning for the loss of my true identity. I'm living my life, but who am I really? And so when the I of lack of self-respect is ruling, I have so much fear of not being loved, so much fear of not belonging, so much fear of rejection. And so when the seed of my thinking is false, I see myself as temporary labels of my physical identity. Those two children are born, the I of arrogance and the I of lack of self-respect, the I of superiority and the I of lack of inferiority. The third I is the original I. And this is really a wonder. I, the soul. And the soul, or even the language in the East. Thank you so much. The language in the East is often used, the Atma. The Atma means three things. I, the living, the dweller in the costume. The soul is a point. And in mathematics, a point exists, but it has no length, breadth, or width. So I am a soul. And this subtle consciousness, which is the real self, sits in the front of the brain and the center of the forehead. I, the soul, have lived before this body, and I, the soul, will continue after this body. And I think that if we start to build a sense of who I am, maybe we can shut the door, it might be just a little bit easier. Thank you. Can you hear me okay, by the way? It's okay. Thank you. So we start to build a picture of the third I, the original I. And the soul, as I was saying, is a point. It exists, but it has really no physical size. And it sits in the front of the brain around the pituitary gland. Just recently, someone in Australia was saying to me that in biology, they are saying that they believe the body is made up of about 40 trillion cells. It's incredible. I don't know how they count these things. The soul is more subtle than one cell. The soul is non-physical. The soul always exists. The soul always exists. The soul's immortal, eternal, non-physical. And when I start to really connect with my true self, it's like coming home to a place inside where I feel so easy and so comfortable, where I don't have to prove myself, I don't have to impress other people. And when I really start to reconnect with my permanent self, this soul, the consciousness that resides in the body, it starts to make me realize that the more I'm under the influence of my ego and my lack of self-respect, I build fear into my life. But when I start to understand I'm the continuity that keeps moving, I've lived before this body, I adopt this body, I act through it. I'm not these temporary labels, I'm much more than these temporary labels. I am the permanent self. And so I would say the first step in a future without fear is understanding that there's nothing but change happening. But the second step is to really understand the permanent self. And the more I become secure in knowing who I am, then I'm able to actually start to deal with the fear of loss, which is at the heart of so much fear. So the first type of fears which many of us have, I would say, are those physical fears. The second type of fears I would call psychological fears. And these can be mental fears, like fears of failure or change, emotional fears, the fears of rejection, etc. But there's one fascinating part of our psychology which is called phobias. You all know phobias. How many phobias do you think there are? There's countless, but if you Google it, and as you know, Google is God these days, you'll find there's something like about 400 phobias. So there's like aviophobia, the fear of flying. There's claustrophobia, the fear of confined spaces. And I remember once, I live in Sydney, and we have, the Brahma Kumaris there have 2 beautiful retreat centers where every weekend we conduct live-in meditation sessions. And one day I was there, and it's about 130 acres of land, has a beautiful waterfall on the property. And a man came to do some work on the property. And he was looking at it and he said, it's a World Heritage Area. And he said, this is so beautiful, but I wouldn't want to live here. And I thought, oh, that's a bit odd. So I said, why? He said, spiders, They have big spiders there. They're harmless, but they're big, And he said, I'm an arachnophobiac, which really means, I have a fear of spiders. And, in the old days in psychology, they used to feel that fear was genetic, you inherited it. But they began to agree with spirituality that fear is directly connected to past experience. And in fact, phobias are not irrational. They are directly connected with past experiences. And so, when we come in front of something similar to a past experience, it just creates that fear within ourselves. And it helps us understand that, in a sense, to go much deeper into the understanding of who I am. Because what I really love about spirituality is it really explores my inner world. Firstly, who am I? I am a soul. But secondly, what is the soul? The soul is really an overname for 3 aspects of consciousness. The mind. The mind is really, I often think of it like a screen. And so all the data from what you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you feel, is thrown up on the screen of your mind. the intellect is that part of you assessing the data. Just as I'm speaking now, a part of you is saying, I like that, I agree with that, I don't agree with that. You know, that part of you constantly assessing at every millisecond of life. And then you perform an action, and every single action is recorded in my subconscious. And so who am I? I am actually a collection of all my past experiences. And so I carry in my subconscious a perfect record of my past experiences. In psychology, they say when you do something 20 times, it becomes a habit. We have so many mental and emotional habits and so many experiences of the past, you know, where I've experienced fear, which overlays and influences my present. And so as a child, if I'm bitten by a dog, every time for the rest of my life, what do I do when I see a dog? I feel resistant. As a child, if I don't feel loved, then I have a fear for the rest of my life often that maybe I won't be loved once again. And so we begin to see that, you know, the first step in a future without fear is really to understand there's nothing but change going on. Second, to begin to reconnect with my permanent self. But thirdly, to really understand the journey of the soul. What has led me to this point now? And that we have actually had many past lives as well. I remember once in Australia, one woman was telling me she had 4 children. And in Australia, because all the cities are on the sea, they teach little children of her age how to swim when they're just, you know, even some kids go into the water before they can walk, for safety reasons, really. And she was saying that when her children were put in the water, 3 of them just loved it. You know how most children really love water. One of them had panic attacks whenever she was near water, because there's some experience in the past which you can't consciously understand, but unconsciously why you sometimes feel so much fear. Or even some of us sometimes feel so easy to express my opinion in front of other people. You know, if anyone says, what do you think? I'm very happy to express, but some people are literally terrified to express an opinion in front of other people, even to speak, you know, what they really feel in front of other people. Because sometimes they have lived in a culture where your opinions or your views are suppressed. And so what happens from the past overlays and colors my life experience in the present. And this, in a way, is one of the reasons why we meditate. One of the reasons why we meditate is not only to experience peace in the present, it's actually to clear really this database of the past on all those fears that are stored in my subconscious, so that I can really lighten myself and clear the past story, which is actually overlaying and influencing my present. And sometimes I also feel that our relationships, there's often so much fear that comes into dealing with certain personalities. You know, sometimes we have fear of authority figures in our lives, fear of their decisions and their effect on me, fear of people's reactions. If people get very angry or, you know, negative, you know, there's so much fear associated in relationships. And yet one of the beautiful things when I begin to understand who I am, that I'm this eternal, subtle entity, the soul. The soul has no gender, the soul has no age, the soul has no nationality, the soul has no religion. Don't you love that? I love that in this world. There's so much division on every level. And yet the soul is beyond that whole game. And when I begin to see another as a soul, it's actually I think, one of the most beautiful ways to respect another person. Because what we do as soon as we meet somebody, unconsciously or consciously we compare, and I position myself as inferior or superior, actually mostly inferior to other people. And yet when you start to see that we're all souls, we all wear these different costumes, we're like actors playing parts in a drama, and I tune into the other as a soul, then I actually start to lose the fear of dealing with people. There's more a sense of equality rather than perhaps inferiority or superiority. Sometimes I think relationships are like icebergs. And I don't mean that they're cold. I mean that an iceberg is 10% above the water, but 90% is below the water. And you know, when we meet people, we're so superficial. We see that 10% and we feel attracted or not so attracted sometimes. How many times have you had the experience you meet somebody, and as you get to know them, what happens? The 90% below the surface begins to reveal itself. And sometimes we think, oh, I'm not sure whether I really want to go there. This is, you know, but I find that the more you understand yourself as a soul, the more you really know that we all carry fears that are stored in my subconscious that overlay and affect my behavior, my reactions, my responses. You are the same too. And so there can be quite a lot of compassion for other people when their behavior is awkward or they overreact to things, because in a sense the soul is like a puppet dancing to the tune of its past and dancing to the tune of its past fears. And so as I begin to build up this understanding of myself, it starts to at least give me a perspective on fear and how I can manage it. But the third type of fears, I would say, perhaps I could call them spiritual fears. The fear of the unknown, the fear of sorrow and sadness, the fear of my own karmic story, meaning my own actions. If I've been dishonest, sometimes I have so much fear that that will catch up with me, that will be revealed. You know, once I was actually doing a program in a country, and I never liked the language, but it's in the contemporary world, it's common, a third world country. I don't like that language, but I think you know what I mean, a poorer country, so to speak. And I was doing a seminar for a government department, and it went on for a few days, and at the end, one of the senior people spoke to me. And he said, you know, I'm so full of fear. And I said, why? And he said, because I've been taking bribes my whole working life, and I'm terrified that my whole community will find out what I've been doing. And he said, I wanted my children to go to England to get a good education. So he said, I took all these bribes, my children went to England, they've got a good education, but I've ruined my own life. That's what he said. I just live in fear. Every day I live in fear that my community will find out. And this is where I think one of the most powerful things to deal with fear is to be honest. You know, they say if you're honest, you can sleep easily. If you're honest, your conscience can be light. I think, what do they say? In English there's a saying, honesty is the best policy. It's a brilliant policy, because otherwise your conscience won't give you pain, and we won't have this gnawing fear that my past will catch up with me and the consequences of that. And I think that really, you know, the spiritual journey is it's like a lifelong journey of inner learning. And that first step is to know and experience who I am. That the reality of life is that I'm the soul. But we all know that. You know, about 70 to 80% of the world believes there's something more than a body. But how do I convert that into a feeling? And this is really why the aim of meditation actually is not to be peaceful. That's the result. The aim of meditation is to know and experience, educate myself how to let go the consciousness of the temporary self and really connect with my permanent self. Because the natural state of the inner self is peace. But when I forget myself and I think I'm a temporary body, my natural state is this overactive mind. And often I feel that my inner world is like a tree. And we all know what a tree, the bits of the tree. There's a seed, a trunk, branches and leaves. The leaves are the thoughts. They're the end product of the self. The leaves are the end product of my inner world. And a lot of us, when my thoughts are unpleasant, they make me feel stressed or anxious or unhappy. We try to cherry pick out our bad thoughts, our negative thoughts. But what happens? More ones just grow, don't they? Because we haven't gone to the seed. So what's feeding the leaves are the branches. These are my mental and emotional patterns. There's so many mental and emotional habits that are feeding this overactive thoughts, too many leaves on the tree. But what is actually feeding the branches is the trunk. That is my subconscious, as we were saying before, that database of my past, which includes my fears. But the seed of the tree is my sense of identity. And when I literally live a life and my sense of self is that I'm a temporary body, and all the labels, I'm a male, I'm an Australian, I'm this, I'm that, then that feeds a false, that grows in a sense of false trunk, false branches, and then on the top, overthinking, so much fear, anxiety, worry, which is a normal human mind at this time. But when we change the seed of the tree and we sow the seed of truth, that I am a soul, an eternal, immortal, conscious being, that affects the subconscious. It has a huge effect on the fears in the subconscious, because most fear is based on loss. And when you realize you're eternal, then I start to change that fear of loss. So the first step of meditation is realizing who I am and releasing the power of peace into my system. But the second step of meditation is to experience true love. To me, that's the great power in life. And I think sometimes we search for true love. Even when we're in families and relationships, still sometimes there's some search going. But there's a huge human dilemma that no relationship is permanent. No relationship is permanent. Whether it's time, whether it's change, whether it's conflict, whether it's separation, whether it's death, the object of my love goes. And the beauty of spirituality is the exploration of the one relationship that always exists. I, the soul, with the divine or the supreme soul. And the second step of meditation is really exploring a relationship which is permanent and only a thought away. And the tools that we use, just as I am a soul, and the soul sits here, but I'm a soul that performs actions. I reap the fruit of my actions. I know happiness. Everyone in this room has known true happiness at some point. But I also know unhappiness as well, sadness, sometimes, unfortunately, deep sadness. We know the ups and downs. But as we see that God or the divine, the supreme soul, is a soul beyond that game, but a real living being. And as I meditate, I'm not just meditating on a concept or a belief. I'm meditating on like a relationship, a lover of the soul, like a parent, but a real conscious soul. And because where there's love, where the heart goes, the mind will follow. And so the second step in meditation is really developing a relationship of I, the soul, with the Supreme Soul, this one relationship that's permanent. And the Supreme Soul, sometimes when we use this language, and we don't have to be religious at all, it's a natural relationship. Like, you can see me, I think, can't you? I'm a soul, but I'm expressing to you through this body. I would say the Supreme Soul, or God, or the Divine, whatever you say, is a living conscious being, but without a body. And this is why when we meditate, we first go through this process of letting go the consciousness of my temporary self and all the labels of gender and age and nationality. And I start to resonate on that frequency of soul consciousness. And then the reality of this relationship with the Supreme Soul is really there. And when I really know that I always exist and this relationship is there too, it's like life can change around me. The fear of loss starts to, we deprogram ourselves from that fear of loss. Sometimes I have the thought that it's like the Supreme Soul is on the FM wavelength. When I, the soul, think I'm a temporary body, I'm on the AM wavelength. I know FM exists, but I can't tune in. It's like religion. We can believe, we can pray, etc. But when I become soul conscious, it's like I'm on the same frequency. And there's this real living connection. And when the soul really connects with the Supreme Soul, it has an extraordinary internal determination and power, not to sort of bow down in front of the whole list of fears which we all have, but most of them are based on a false sense of self or body consciousness, thinking I'm a temporary body. And so meditation is really a practice, I would say, to know who I am, connect with the divine, and the more I rebuild my permanent self in that permanent relationship, the fear of everything temporary goes. And I start to understand the nature of life is just change. Things will come and go. And sometimes these days, when I use the word meditation, I don't know. Can I ask who meditates here? Yes. Sometimes I think these days a lot of people, when they think about meditation, think it seems like I have to elevate my consciousness into another realm. And when that doesn't happen, I'm always feeling I'm not doing it very well. I find so many people try to meditate, but deep down have the feeling I don't meditate very well. And this is why in the Brahma Kumaris we often use the word remember. Because when we remember, every millisecond the mind is connecting and remembering. Three things happen. You connect. Whatever you connect with, you're influenced by. And whatever you're influenced by, you have a feeling inside. And so if you're sitting here and you're remembering a family member, the instant you connect to them, if it's a good relationship, you feel good. You download that good feeling. But if you're sitting here at this very moment and you remember someone you're not getting along well with, the instant you touch them, you remember them, you're influenced by that conflict, and you feel that discomfort. And so during the day, we're sort of connecting here, connecting there, we're plugging in, even in a few seconds. And we plug into these heavy memories, these fears, these worries, this anxiety, and then we wonder why I don't feel happy. The logic really of meditation is to remember a source that is constant in peace, love, and happiness. And it's absolutely real. So when I remember the Supreme Soul, I actually tune into a constant source of all the nutrients, the spiritual nutrients I need And so meditation is I imagine most of us here meditate, but I don't think it's ever been more necessary to meditate at this time than before. I feel it's so important. Would you agree? Would you agree? How important is it? Honestly, if we don't look after our mind, who's going to? And unfortunately, really, the mind is out of control with a whole lot of unfortunate emotions, anxiety, depression, all these sorts of things. So shall we have a little bit of meditation? And I will just speak a few thoughts. And just for these few minutes, if we can all sit very quietly and calmly, and I'll just suggest a few thoughts. Let me reflect. Internally, and with gentle determination, follow the thoughts suggested. Meditation is the journey to know and experience who I am. Just visualize yourself as a minute spark of life energy, sitting lightly in the front of the brain, in the center of the forehead. This is my permanent, unlimited identity or sense of self. Now let me gently let go, step back, and withdraw from all the limited identities that I've collected. Just consciously feel yourself letting go, identifying with what I do, my roles and responsibilities. Just mentally feel yourself stepping back, withdrawing. That is not who I am. That is what I do. Now just for a moment, observe your body, your bodily roots. Almost feel you're above your chair, observing your body. Just observe all the labels of colour and gender and age, nationality. This is not who I am. All these labels are temporary. And feel yourself going deeper and deeper into the awareness that I am an eternal soul. A minute point of light. I am a peaceful soul. look through the eye of my mind and I visualize the light of the divine. Just hold in the image of your mind a radiant jewel of light, an ocean of peace, an ocean of love. Just allow yourself to be completely loved. Feel this pure love enter the core of your being. It is this love, this relationship, this permanent love that helps dissolve the fear of loss. The loss of all the temporary things that I've attached my heart to. This connection is just a thought away. If each morning I wake, and before I think about what happened yesterday and what I have to do today, I go deep into the awareness of who I am. I connect to the divine. I fill myself with inner strength and self-respect. To meditate regularly is an act